Eduardo, you wanted this recorded, right?
Yeah, that would be fantastic. That way we can play it again for our members and post it.
Sure.
Whoever couldn't make it or missed it for any reason, that way, because this is pretty incredible, not to share. It was fun.
Did you want to start right on time at the end of the countdown, or give people a little more chance to get in?
Perhaps the next minute or 30 seconds or so, that would be great. And again, we can always, if somebody joins late, we can mention it's going to be recorded and they can catch up too.
Chris, can you link to me? Is there an online portal for this, or should I, just to be able to see comments, should I do it via the computer?
There's no comments because it's a two-way. It's not like the wine stream.
So no need to log on via the computer?
Correct.
Okay. Easy. That's great. I love it. Even a low-tech version. Wow. So why am I the only one drinking? Where's everyone else's
I
wine?
know. I was going to open this once we started, but I'm not going to wait anymore.
Yeah, we started. Countdown's done. Now a happy hour begins.
Exactly. Let's do this. I did Cordovan a little bit earlier, and now it's time to go.
Oh, yum.
Cheers to you guys.
Yes, cheers.
Cheers. Happy Thursday.
Mm-hmm. That is a piece of heaven.
Yeah.
It was a great vintage.
Indeed.
You know, Chris, we've got you off camera. Is that on purpose?
Oh, sorry. There we are. I'm here.
There we go. Excellent. So as far as directing questions, should I go pick one of you guys or just ask for both and you guys figure it out, or?
Yeah, we'll fight over the mic.
A little sibling rivalry on camera, why not?
Hey, never has more excitement.
Awesome.
All right. Well, Eduardo, you have a good amount of people
All right.
in now. You're ready to start whenever you like.
Excellent. Let's not make him wait. So you say when.
When?
When. All right. Well, welcome everybody to an amazing show today. We have with one of the icons in the Coombsville appellation, if not the Napa Valley, if not California, and via Argentina. This is a project that I've been a huge fan for years. First vintage coming out in 2001, but we're very lucky today to have Florencia and Christian to join us today, answer some questions, talk a little bit in depth about what makes this estate, aside from the obvious technology that's impressive, so charismatic, and the wines speak for themselves. Speaking of that, I hope you are all enjoying some amazing wines. Today we're tasting the 16 Gaston, which is incredible, and we'll get a little more in depth. But first, I'll lend the mic to you guys, Florencia and Christian. Thanks for joining.
Absolutely. Thank you, Eduardo. It's a real pleasure to be on. I love how, I was just, like we were saying earlier, I just love how fast and dynamic you guys are, you know, being a winery that values technology and values the craft of winemaking. I also love how everyone's adapting so quickly onto these new formats and how to share these wines. So thank you for the opportunity of bringing your customers to our story and to our wines. It's a real pleasure. I'm here, I'm Florencia Palmaz. You'll see underneath my name, it says PV South. That's because I'm at the winery right now on this, my video conference system is PV South, and my brother there, Christian, he's actually off property today, so he's the one who's reading Genesee Valley Ranch. So
fantastic.
Chris?
Shall we talk a little bit about housekeeping? And there's a couple things before we go full on, as far as what you're seeing on your screen. And if you don't mind muting yourself, and then we can unmute as questions arise or as we're speaking, and then raise your hand. Obviously, if there's a question that is burning you to ask about this project, about the wines, about whatnot. But yeah, there's a little bit of the overview of the platform LiveSets, which is it's incredible what they're doing. So without further ado. Definitely. So let's talk about a little bit about, obviously, your father and how a little bit of his background. I'm super thrilled every time I hear stories about him and I hear him talk, as I told you I can hear him for hours. One of the most important people in his realm.
Well, thank you. Yes, no. So we're very fortunate. We definitely have a dad who has had an extraordinary career in medicine before coming into wine. We, like you had mentioned, we came from Argentina in 1978. My father was a student at the University of California, Davis, and while working at the UC Davis system, came up with the first concepts for the first intravascular stent. So he developed the first stent, and it became an extraordinary sort of medical revolution. It actually was considered the top 10 patents that changed the world by the U.S. Patent Office, and he was inducted into the Inventors Hall of Fame, and we've had an amazing life and career as a result. And starting in 1996, both my parents, they wanted to build a business that was a legacy that would allow us all to live together. And we found this vineyard here in Napa Valley to be a place to sort of call home, and have been all of us together ever since then, you know, working on this vineyard, working on this land, and starting the winery.
So what year did your dad have the connection to the land and found this place?
In 1996, we found the property.
Okay, fantastic.
It was an abandoned winery for 86 years. So this actually was a pre-Prohibition winery. It was known as one of the first wineries in the town of Napa, as Cedar Knoll Vineyards. It was founded by a gentleman named Henry Hagen. And actually, yeah, that's a really cool photo. That's the map that's a map of the town of Napa that's sitting in City Hall today, and our vineyard is there being shown as Cedar Knoll in 1889 as the hallmark vineyard of the town of Napa. Back then. So yeah, Henry Hagen had an extraordinary career in wine and really made some beautiful juice. He picked a good piece of land to do it on, and unfortunately phylloxera and Prohibition took him out, and he basically had to shutter the operation in 1910. And actually 1895 he shut down and lost the property in 1910. And like so many properties in Napa, you know, we became victims of Prohibition, and the property sort of fell into disrepair. And you know, like so many, there were really only three things to do during Prohibition. It was either Sacramento wine, gambling, and prostitution. This one fell into the third camp. So we had a few dark years on property.
Oh, right.
Yeah, if the walls could talk, I can tell you. And
I can only imagine.
We purchased the property in '96 from the politician's stepdaughter's husband's second wife, who bought it from the madam who ran it during Prohibition. So we all came on property,
That is
and there we
quite
are.
a story. So, no vineyards in the meantime, right? After
Correct.
Since Prohibition, was there anything growing?
So the only agricultural activity that happened since 1910 was dried fruit, prunes specifically, which was very typical. You know, World War II was a time here in Napa where there was a lot of subsidies for dried fruit for the war effort. So this property was one of those. Yeah.
Absolutely. So what was it for you guys to grow up in this beautiful property, which I've visited plenty of times, and I love it every time.
Oh my gosh, it's magic. I'll never lose an appreciation for really this sense that that this is so much larger than us. You know, almost as soon as I came on property, and I know I can speak for behalf of the rest of the family, we really felt like we were the stewards of a slice of history. And so we were trying to have as light a footprint on this piece of land, and hopefully multiple generations of our family will have the honor of being the stewards of this land. But it's pretty special. And, you know, being up against a mountain like this, you know, and you know, we have vineyards in all sections of the mountain, but our main activities are right up here against the foothill of the mountain. You have this constant sense of scale where we're really little and everything else around us is really big. So it's so pretty humbling to be in a property
How
like
many
this.
acres do you have planted?
Total acreage planted. Chris, you're the technical one. Tell us the specs of the vineyard.
So we can review that a little bit. So the property, you know, just to give you a little sense of location, the property's down here in the southeastern side of Napa, right? Like you mentioned, Eduardo, in Coombsville. We define sort of the northeastern corner of Coombsville. Property 640 acres, and exactly 64 acres are planted. So that's easy to remember. Just about 10%. Of the property's acreage. We have all 5 Bordeaux, and we have 3 whites and a little bit of Grenache for fun. Very diverse microclimates and roots and soil types in these 3 locations. So therefore, quite a diverse rootstock mapping and a even more diverse clonal selection. So, you know, this is really what began to define the property as having sort of these 3 major locations, but you know, thinking of them as being very unique and all contributing towards the blend. And that's what really drove the winery's design, right? Was the ability to maintain each of these unique parcels separate.
Yeah, you know, when you've got a property that's not as much diverse.
For guidance
Oof. You know, guidance was about, you know, I love that about this industry where we're in a business in which there's so much collaboration. There's so many great friendships to be had among what would traditionally be considered another industry competitors. So we had a lot of other vintners that helped us. We pretty early on realized, though, that just allowing ourselves to give up the entire operation to a bunch of consultants was not going to be our approach. We're very much a hands-on family. So when we came on, my father said, get all the guidance you want, but don't let anyone else do your job. So we brought in, we leaned on UC Davis quite a bit. We worked with Randy Dunn as our first consulting winemaker. We worked with several different viticultural groups, and we really just sort of became friends with the community and started slowly, you know, chipping our way at the knowledge gap that was and still is pretty immense.
Certainly, always learning, always growing. Did you guys, did your family have any roots in Argentina with wine?
Well, it turns out we did, and we didn't even know it. My aunt in Argentina just last year started doing family genealogy, and it turns out that my father's great-great-great-great-grandfather was in fact a negociant or a wine agent in Mendoza. So yeah, we didn't even know it, and we do. But then again, Argentina of the 1800s.
History repeating itself.
Right, exactly.
That's pretty incredible. Now, tell me, everything you produce is from your estate, or do you source any fruit from out?
We do have one very small parcel of Chardonnay that we're buying off property today to balance out our Chardonnay. We are big fans of Hyde Vineyards Chard, and so we do augment a little bit of our Chard with their fruit. But all of the Cabernets are 100% estate. I'm the Cab blends, so the reds are ours.
Fantastic. And then speaking about the history of the property, you do have Cedar Knoll, which is sort of like a sister, a baby out of Palmaz, right? I don't know what's the best words to describe the project.
You know, that's our sister property. It's our under label. We find it really important, being a house of so much diversity like we have. You know, every vineyard behaves differently and expresses differently each vintage, depending on the weather pattern. You know, different microclimates will shine or be at a disadvantage in a certain vintage. So, you know, for us, we grow and vinify everything to basically make the best wine possible. So Palmaz is priority. Gaston ends up coming second in our blending priority as that single Cabernet that really shined and was something exceptional. And I know we'll get to that more. And then Cedar Knoll is in fact leftovers.
Gaston is Christian's middle name, right? As I just found out.
It is.
The name.
And it's a bit of a
sorry to
family
interrupt,
name.
but there's something that everybody joining.
Sorry, go ahead, Eduardo.
Something that's burning in everybody's mind that's watching right now is that technology. And Christian, if you could like illustrate us a little bit of what you guys have done to the level of technology and utilize in a winery.
Absolutely. You know, so we were talking a little bit about the vineyards themselves. So the winery was really built with this in mind, right? So 110,000 square feet underground, it's equal to a 22-story building. The idea was to build a facility that truly leveraged the diversity of the property and maintained separation, and then allowed gravity to basically do the work of moving the wines through the process so that we preserve the delicate, you know, molecular structure of the wine, the tannin polymerization, all the things that we've learned in the last few decades about wine to basically create a layered cake facility in the mountain, right? And so this is essentially what was created. If you look at it from the side, you know, it's pretty simple, but the grapes come in at the red level at the top. Fermentation occurs inside this dome-like structure that's called the fermentation dome. We separate free run and press down in level 3 in the yellow area. Then the grapes spend the first year in the blue level, that's level 2, and then the winemakers get the chance to totally restructure and reprofile all the barreling, right? So we use wonderful French oak from all these different forests in France with different toasting techniques, and just like spices on a spice rack, the winemakers want to have a lot of diversity. And then so that wine, the barrel itself comes up a special elevator up to level 3, where the green level is.
That's incredible.
And there, the wines can spend their last year, so the second year in barrel, and then the tanks on level 3, the yellow area, is where the blend is assembled to microliter accuracy. And then the distance from the yellow to the purple level is 133 feet, which is exactly the right feet at 2.31 feet per PSI. Gives you the right pressure to filter and bottle by gravity without using pumps. And so we're a true gravity flow winery in that from grapes to bottle, there's no compromising in the use of pumps or aggressive movements.
That is incredible. It always makes my head explode at the amount of like precision that you guys have managed to acquire. Do you think there's a property anywhere in the world that is sort of at your level or as shoulder to shoulder?
Well, it's, you know, the thing is though, when you talk about wineries, you know, the best wineries in the world are really built for the vineyards they take care of. And that's really the way to think of it. You know, I think what Palmaz Vineyards has done really well is that it has utilized this its architecture very much for the for the parcels, the 64 acres of estate fruit that it vinifies, and that's what it does well. And other wineries, some of the best wineries in the world do, they take care of their vineyards. If our property were 64 acres of vines in the middle of Rutherford and all of it came in 7 days, the winery would look very differently. So, I think that's what makes our facility so unique, aside from the fact of being, gravity flow and employing some other cool techniques, like the fact that we are fully net zero water consumptive. So every drop of water we use, we treat back to potable standards. All of those characteristics are unique. And really the heart of the facility is this, right? This is the dome we were talking about. Inside the dome, the carousel is a rotating structure. So when instead of sending the fruit to the grapes, in this case, we bring instead of sending the fruit to the tank, we bring the tank to the fruit. And that's why the carousel is able to rotate to bring one of those 24 tanks, right? 24 tanks, 24 parcels. This is what that room looks like if you were standing on that balcony and looking in at the top. And the thing you can't miss there, of course, is this sort of info data system on the surface. We call this Felix, and Felix is think of it as an artificial intelligent machine learning assistant for the winemakers. And the reason we created this system, which was quite unique for the wine industry at the time, and still is that the winemakers were potentially biting off a little more than they could chew in the sense of having 24 tanks. And so we were concerned that we didn't want to lose the attention to detail and focus and essentially hamper the stylistic creativity of the winemaking team by having so many fermenters of these little parcels. And so Felix was designed to essentially allow the winemakers to focus on the things we can't put numbers to, things that you can see, smell, taste, and feel, and so that Felix can manage the fermentation for you on the metrics that we do care about. And so this is very technical, but this is essentially one of the screens that Felix is processing. So it's looking at over 3.5 million points of temperature in the tank, and basically tracking the bricks using something called a sonodensitometer. So we're measuring the speed of sound in the tank. And then basically what's happening is Felix is modulating the temperature of the fermenter automatically to maintain the rate of fermentation the winemaker wants. And so as we move on, to different parts of the fermentation, the winemakers are very interested in maintaining that quality level and also the stylistic interactions that are so important, right? I mean, this stuff is magic. It's grape juice on day 1. By day 7, it's tasting totally, new flavors and aromas and colors and textures are arriving and showing up almost on the half hour. And so you want the winemaking team able to carry the instrument that really makes great wine, which is a glass.
Incredible. I'm just geeking out. I don't know this information that you get from Felix. It's incredible. Wow, you can change any video game or anything for this fun, useful technology. That's really incredible. So you and the team, I imagine you guys are constantly monitoring. Like, are you sometimes at dinner and then pull out your phone and see what's going on? Is it like that, or are you kind of restrained back a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, it's mostly the winemaking team, but basically, Felix is watching over the tanks. It's really a tool to be used during the process of when they're tasting, right? So it's there to enhance their creativity and allows their minds to go to places that they otherwise don't really get the privilege to do so, because they have to worry about, is the tank the right temperature? Are we fermenting too quickly? Should we be pumping over at this point? All of those sort of critical decision-making parts of that basically answer, is the fermentation healthy? Felix is able to do that for you. And Florencia can speak a little bit. She's closer to the winemaking side than the creativity of how that enhances their creative input.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
I mean, speaking about the winemaking team, if you wanted to give a little background for everyone who's watching, and what constitutes your legendary team, if you will.
Well, legendary. You're very generous by calling us legendary. We do have an incredible team. We're very close. We've been a cohesive team, actually the same team since 2003. For us, consistency of style and that mission of what is what is our direction is very important to us. We are fortunate. We are executive winemaker is Tina Mitchell, and then consulting winemaker Mia Klein. You can see the two of them there doing final touches on the blend. And then, like every family-run business, we also have an assistant winemaker who's working with us, who's in fact Tina's son, and hopefully will be able to carry the torch whenever Tina chooses to retire. For us, it's very much a team effort. The other thing that I think is also very unique to our team is Tina, not only as head winemaker, is also head of viticulture. So winemaking begins in the field, and for us, those activities very much are field-driven first, and then, of course, followed up with the winemaking. All this technology that you're seeing is amazing, but the reality is it doesn't make better wine. It just doesn't mess up wine. Right, the true potential and the true quality and glory of what you can produce, it's outside. I point outside because my windows are right here. So, so
that's amazing. Very cool. What's your production? Let's talk about Gaston, since we're drinking it and enjoying it. Tell us a little bit about Gaston and about everything that goes into making each bottle.
Sure. So Gaston is a very fun side project that we started. Actually, the first vintage we started making wine. In the first year that we were making wine in 2001, and we were making that final blend, we actually found one parcel that had just an extraordinarily different characteristic from the rest. At the time, it had so much more tannin. It was so much more broad and brawny, and truly in tank, when we were blending this wine, it felt like it needed a little bit more barrel age. So we didn't blend it into the main wine that very first vintage. It went into barrel for an additional 6 months, and we were scrambling because, as you know, in the legal world of wine, getting a COLA approved and a label approval is not a minor fact. So here we were scrambling in the background, first vintage out the gate, and we had extra wine, needed a different label. And we kept on referring it as the brawny little brother. I was like, what are we going to do with this just beast of a wine we got in tank and aging away in barrels? So brawny little brother, my brother happens to have an amazing middle name. That's a very brawny name in American culture, Gaston. Yeah. And so that's how the label was made, because you're able to circumvent the entire legal process of a COLA application if you just put they call it fantasy name, right? A second name underneath. So Palmaz Vineyards, brawny little brother was born, Gaston. At the time, we didn't think we were going to make more of it. We thought it was just a one-off, a fun year. And the reality was, as soon as we started getting in fruit in the second vintage and the third vintage and the fourth vintage, we found that it was really an extraordinary opportunity for us to take Gaston and use it as the celebration of a unique characteristic of the land each year. And each year, something surprising happens somewhere that we just want to set it aside and celebrate it on its own. Over the years, just because we're a blending house by nature, I always end up wanting to tinker with it and put a little bit of other stuff in there. So not every year, it's one parcel. I don't like being hemmed in rules, so don't tell me. Second you tell me what to do, I break the rule.
But it is always.
Are you agreeing with me, brother?
Absolutely, but it does have some constraints in that it's always 100% Cabernet. And it does, absolutely. At least in history, it's always come from a single sub-element of, in other words, like the way I'm not in the winemaking side, but I work very closely with these guys. They, for them, think of it like they start with colors on a palette, right? And the goal is to paint a painting. Sometimes they may blend two primary colors together to create something that then becomes an element. So Gaston is either a primary color on its by itself, or it's a combination of two things, but it's often not more than that. So it is kind of figuratively an element of the vineyard that on its own can, is balanced and elegant and has all the things that the winemakers like to show off. And Flo, I'll steal your analogy here, comparing to music. But if Palmaz is supposed to be the symphony, right, with all the notes and all these beautiful complexity, then Gaston is like the jazz soloist, right? It gets to be that one, really kind of cool element. It's not as complex, and it doesn't have that Palmaz estate cab characteristic, but in its own right, it's a bigger wine. It's bolder, yeah, and it is. But I love the way it's made, and as a result, it's not made every year. There have been years in which the winemaking team decided we need it all. In other words, we need Gaston in the main blend, and therefore this is not a Gaston year. And fortunately, since 2012, we've been able to make a Gaston every year because we've had great years, right? So, we've been kind of in a great pattern. There's been plenty of abundance and great quality out there. So, it's a really fun wine. It's one we always look
speaking about what Gaston represents, at least in my world, and now comparing it to Flo's analogy to music, I recently enjoyed the 13, and it was just like Miles Davis in a surround sound setting, and it was really incredible, and the longevity of the wine, just wow. I mean, I want to get a bunch of the 16 and just store it away, give it a few years, and it's incredible right now. I mean, the 16 is just singing, but what I saw in that 13 and the timing, what the gift of time gave to that wine was really incredible.
Yeah.
Well, and you pointed out something that is sort of a classic hallmark to all of our vintages. Because we're gravity flow vinifying everything, there is so little oxygen in the bottle, right? These are made like tightly wound time clocks. All of our wines are unraveling and aging at a very slow, almost geologic time. Right. I have yet to see a single one of our vintages. And, first vintage was 2001. I've yet to see one arc. And I'm definitely seeing, as we're getting maturity in the vineyard and we're sort of as a team getting better and better at our craft, we really are striking a beautiful balance between a drinkability and accessibility. That's achieved through acid balance and tannin management and making sure that there's finesse. But we're just equally still addressing that tail that is really for the true cellar collectors like your customers. This is a wine that will be able to be graciously served at the next major milestones in their life, whether they be 5 years, 10 years, 20 years from now. That's our intention. Yeah.
Absolutely. On that note, I want to open it for anybody. If anybody is curious about something or has any question, feel free to raise your hand and interact a little bit. But continuing that down the path of Gaston, how many cases were produced in this particular year?
Oh, it's a good question. We can pull that up here. So
and also,
it was
there, Christian, a little bit about the vintage, because I know you have this amazing chart that really encompasses the whole vintage. Well, we talk about that.
Let's talk a little bit about that. Sure. So, so just to answer your question, just over 1,000 cases on the Gaston.
Excellent.
So this, the 2016 vintage was a lot like the vintages prior to it, in which they're really textbook years. I mean, it was such a great time for Napa Valley. And, nature gave us what we needed. Rains really predominantly stopped in March. We had a normal warm up to a spring, nice long growing season. A little bit of nature came back and gave us a little bit of trouble in mid-October, but you see it didn't matter because the harvest ended. We naturally got those 220 days or so of growing season that we typically need. So there was really no constraints in 2016. It was a year of abundance and great quality.
You know, the other thing to look at it in 16 when you sort of see this is one of my favorite things of having my brother, as technical as he is, to be able to correlate what we qualitatively experience in a glass and then be able to oversee that with, you know, quantitative data. When you look at 16, it's a vintage of a very long growing season and very few 100-degree days. There were just 3 little spikes for, you know, a few hours towards the end of the season. So it was a very gracious vintage that allowed us to have a lot of fruit development without being constrained with bookends of extreme heat or any weather, you know, incidences. And then when you taste it, the mouthfeel has that just elegant, winding, big breath that has to do a lot with that sort of slow, even, gracious ripening in the field.
Pretty incredible. To button up a little bit on your vineyard and a little bit about, tell us about the diurnal shift. Is it as drastic as Oakville per se, or a little more gentle? What would you say about temperature fluctuation?
We have like 3 distinct personality types. So we've got a 300-foot elevation vineyard that is protected by its mountainside, that is actually not getting full sun until about 9:30, 10 in the morning. It's protected by fog, so it's moderated in all of its weather, but gets really quite warm because the solar heat and the reflection of the mountain. So it's our big fruit bombs, our soft tannins, our big Napa style, you know, big babies. Yeah. Then I've got my problem middle child, who's my 1,200 elevation vineyard, who's flanked by two mountain peaks. So it gets shortened sunlight in the morning, shortened sunlight in the evening, and the cold just sits and traps.
Yeah.
It's
about 13 degrees average cooler, but it's interesting. You know, because when we talk about temperature and we talk about solar radiation differently, we measure both. So what we actually do is we culminate that. We have 3 weather stations on property. So our typical weather graphs look like this, where we also overlay the yellow. That's the daily solar radiation. That's the calories per area that the sun gave the plants, right? And so on days of cloud cover and rain, you'll see dips, obviously, where the sun just didn't get, you know, much energy down to the leaf level. But what's interesting was when you look at it from an elevation perspective, in the beginning of the year, you'll notice that all 3 elevations are quite similar. But starting around mid-April, early March, you'll notice that the upper vineyards, the 1,200 and the 1,400, get more daily sunlight than the lower vineyard. And it's interesting, you know, what changes in the middle of the spring? Well, what happens is the fog. So the fog rolls in from the bay and sits on top of the valley floor. But what sits above it, right? 12 and 1,400 up on Mount George are always above it. So although it's true they get less sunlight in terms of, because the sun has to rise and set on the peaks around the vineyard, the fog can take hours out of the day all through the summer. And it's really interesting to see this. This is an effect you only see if you're measuring the sunlight. But we talk about microclimates. We use that word very loosely in our industry. But this is a true microclimate effect, right? Just a mile separation, 1,000 feet of elevation. And you're talking about, really it's mesoclimate. But this is a really unique effect of what it is to be in a valley or on a mountain.
Yeah, and then 1,400, which is the third one.
I'm so glad I asked that, because I knew you would have something like this.
Yeah, 1,400 is well above that fog bank, and will have some wind shear. So it's our most extracted. It's our most long tannins, big Cabernets, really extraordinary structures come out of the 1,400. Gaston comes out of the 1,400 elevation more often than not. So this is actually, this is a perfect example. 2016 is actually it's a blend of 3 neighboring vineyards, very similar in soil type. So you can see there, which are sort of our 3 biggest bad boys at the top.
Yeah, it is interesting. You know, in colder years, we'll see the winemakers favor the lower vineyard a little bit more. Like in 2013, I believe, Flo, the Gaston came from lower vineyard fruit. But
Agreed.
You know, in 16, it was a year for the upper vineyards to shine, and it was a surprise to no one that it was the Gaston. You know, that 1400 made the Gaston that year.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, this was tasting
And
incredible.
Your geology and topography is just as drastic as the climate because of the elevation.
Completely. Yeah.
Yes.
The geology is completely different. The soil, the irrigation, the root stocks, and the clones, all of them have to change. And we actually look at the topography variation, not even by elevation, but by the particular parcel. So topography, you look at the way our vineyards are laid out, they're not put into a grid to be efficient for the tractor. They are put in those shapes because those are the shapes of the topography of the subsoil.
Wow.
So when we ran the soil samples, when we first started the operation, Chris, I mean, you always have an amazing number of how many bore samples we ran just to decide the shapes of the vineyards.
Sure.
How many bore samples did we do?
Initially, we continue to do them, but initially in that initial planting, there was 4,900 core samples. Basically, think of a grid of 80 feet. Across the whole areas of the property where vineyards were being considered to be planted, which subsequently were the same locations that Henry Hagen had planted during his time. Obviously, you know, the reasons why we pick certain areas over other areas hasn't changed in over 100 years. But what has changed is the way we may orient the vineyards, the row facing, the rootstocks we use. Obviously, rootstocks were really not a thing back in the late 1800s. That came after phylloxera. But the concept and the rationale and many of the clones that are used today are even the same. So a lot of those considerations were driven obviously by science, by the geology itself.
A lot of facts, yeah. Pretty incredible.
And then it was basically confirming what our forefathers already knew, which is ironic, but yeah.
It is, indeed.
It's a really big circle in the wine world.
Wow, I want to thank you guys for taking the time, sharing this amazing wines with us, letting us open it to our members. And I know people that didn't know Palmaz, if they lived under a rock, now they're huge fans. And just like us, it is a very contagious, just like your guys' personality. So thank you so much. I can't wait to visit again. Every time I have somebody come to town, family, friends, we make an excuse to come visit you. So I can't wait till that starts reopening. But until then, I want to say a big cheers to you guys and kudos for what you're doing.
Absolutely. Cheers. Thank you, Eduardo, for the opportunity. It's always
so
a pleasure.
Much. And we will continue this conversation because we could talk for hours, especially with all of your knowledge and Chris's technology behind it. It's incredible. And a big hug to your dad as well.
Our pleasure. Thank you.
Bye. Cheers.